I think we all desperately search for magic. And I use that in a really big, nebulous, encompassing way. I think we all want magic. We want something that we can't explain, but that we feel like is a part of our reality and takes care of us and watches over us, protects us, strengthens us, and gives us whatever courage we need to go through every day. And however we call that magic, or whatever name we give it, or whatever belief system we come from, we all have this desire to connect to something unseen.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. You are in for such a treat because we have Deb Bowen with us on the show today. Deb's an intuitive grief counselor and self-proclaimed hippie radical who has a deep connection to the sea and sand. Now, you know I'm going to have a lot of questions about how all that ties together. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now let's go talk with Miss Deb. Deb, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted to have you on. I was just saying before we started recording, I can't believe it took us this long to get you on the show.
I am delighted to be here, Julie. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, you are most welcome. You help people find the divinity within themselves. Do we all have it, and how do we find it?
You bet we do. We are all divine. Absolutely. I think for me, one of the ways that we find divinity in ourselves is by being able to see it in others. And when I say that, I don't just mean people. I mean nature around us, for example. You know, in many indigenous cultures, there's the idea that we don't have a hierarchical mindset in the world. Humans are not the top of the chain, for example. There's this notion that we're all equal. And when we can see ourselves and our place in the world around us from that perspective of that we really all have a place in the great gift-giving circle, then we see that divinity inside ourselves and inside everybody.
Okay. Say more about how do we know it's divinity? I mean, how do we feel it? How do we see it? How does it appear to people? I'm sure everybody has their own interpretation, but how do we know, oh, that's the divinity inside of me, instead of, oh, there goes Peter Rabbit hopping down the road?
Interestingly, the best way to see the divinity in ourselves and in other people is to look at the science of us. And here's what I mean by that. If you study sacred geometry, for example, we think of that as an art form. We think of it as a divine way of being in some kind of mystery that we can't describe or explain. And at the same time, it's a basic divinity. It's a basic science theory. If you take, for example, a leaf unfurling or the structure of a pine cone, you got science going on there. But it's also something that is really beyond explanation, and that's what makes it divine.
I love sacred geometry stuff, and I don't know much about it, so I want to come back to that in a minute. But first, I love this. You call yourself a hippie radical. What's that mean? And has it helped you embrace your intuition and your other psychics abilities and skills and teachings and understandings?
My most recent publication was an essay published in a journal called Salvation South. And the name of the article is Let No One Turn You Around, based on that wonderful old hymn, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. And I tell the story of how my beliefs from the 60s and 70s, so your listeners can tell I'm old, from the 60s and 70s, dramatically influenced who I am and what I believe today.
How so?
Well, partly because of the social unrest and the social issues in the Vietnam War and the racial issues and so forth. And for me, that became a spiritual journey there is a deeply spiritual aspect to social justice and to being not involved in war. And that led me into that whole awakening and I use that word in quotation marks, that whole awakening that folks did in the late 70s and early 80s that really brought us back in a circle to being having an awareness of what later became New Age thought was the term for it back in those days. But all of that came out of that notion of connectedness. I'm back to that theory again, that notion of connectedness that goes back to who we were and what we were working towards in the 60s and 70s.
Do you think that that's why there was such an emphasis on the drug culture in the 60s? I was little in the 60s. I mean, I was a kid, but I remember the hippies and the drugs and all of that. Was that their way, that time's way of the children and the younger people getting in touch with that spiritual side of themselves? Certainly LSD, I think, is comparable to ayahuasca and the other hallucinogenic drugs that we hear about today being used on spiritual journeys for people.
Right, absolutely. We did. And I never used any of that, but I do know that that what it really became, the drug piece of it, certainly there was the drugs for fun piece of it that was a part of that. But it was also this idea of being enlightened in a disembodied way, of seeking something beyond the physical. And then we're back to metaphysicals. So I think that may have been a part of the drug use, certainly back then.
Well, and the whole culture of love, right? That was all about, they had the love-ins and they had the, all that kind of stuff. So I lived close by Kent State when I was little in Ohio. And I remember, I don't know, we left there when I was 10 and moved back to Columbus. But I remember when they had the curfews and they had all of that. And I remember being in the car with my family and you could see where they had the roads blocked for certain things. And I remember seeing the tanks and all of that. I think I was probably, 8-ish, 9-ish maybe, when that was going on. And Kent was the next town over from where we lived.
I'm older than you. I was a freshman in college. And I knew exactly what went on my campus after that morning.
Yeah. What happened? Well, first of all, explain what the whole Kent State thing was for people who are listening that don't know.
I don't even know what led up to it particularly, but it was at Kent State University in Ohio is where students who were protesting the Vietnam War National Guardsmen opened fire on them and killed 4 students. No, let me rephrase that. They weren't all students. Killed 4 people. And so there was this mass across the country protest of that being sanctioned by the government for the National Guard to do that. And all over the country and in the college that I was in at the time, many administrations were smart enough to cancel classes and give us time to mourn and time to have moratoriums and memorial services and so forth. And that's what happened on my campus. And I write about that in my short story, on that essay.
And then wonderful things come out of that, right? People understand that, okay, we need to reevaluate what happened there. How can we prevent this from happening in the future? What are the changes that need to be made? And certainly that's how the government gets their notice, and they all need to be reelected. So when the populace is upset about things, they take notice on that, certainly. And I'm sure that that's what you went through too during that time, trying to help create change.
We believed we were, indeed. We hoped we were. Had some good music come out of it. I'm serious.
And I think that brings up a really interesting point too, is the music was so different in the 60s from what it had been previously. And I can remember my parents saying, "Oh, this music is atrocious." And now, it's just classics. And we look at it now and how it evolved and became part of the zeitgeist. not just about the war or about, the things that were going on at the time, but just the whole genre of music was very different.
Well, it was. I mean, I could talk for hours about music and the coming together of so many different types of music: rock and roll, rhythm and blues, soul, folk, on and on and on and on that go. Bluegrass, yeah. And so all of that did come together in such a really beautiful way. And one of the things that I see today are younger musicians carrying that torch today. And I love seeing that.
How so? What are they doing to carry the torch?
I think about folks like Rhiannon Giddens, who is just an amazing musician. She is not only a musician, but she took Yo-Yo Ma's place as director of Silk Road Suites. She does a program on public radio tracing the heritage of the railroad and the Chinese folks who came over to build that railroad and what happened to the women who were not working on the railroad, but the Chinese women. And she is a historian looking at the banjo and its history and takes us back to Africa. And she looks at diasporas and in so many different cultures. But she stands on a stage with a banjo and plays barefooted and tells wonderful stories and histories and brings all of that together. For example, at the Newport Folk Festival this summer in Rhode Island, she and Joan Baez and Taj Mahal were on stage working together, and Mavis Stapleton was there too, just working together to keep alive that notion of music and heritage and our obligation for social justice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to come back to that as far as legends go, because that fascinates me too. But first, do you come from a spiritual family?
I come from a Christian family.
Okay. And did that influence your wanting to explore spirit more, wanting to explore, is there more to the story than meets the eye kind of a thing?
Absolutely, there is. My family was devout Presbyterians. And I grew up in a Presbyterian church that was just wonderful and mainstream and lovely, and I'm very grateful for all that I learned there. And in the late 1960s, when the Beatles went to India, I told my father I wanted to be a Buddhist. I didn't know anything about Buddhism. I didn't know the difference between Hindu and Buddhist. Right? Well, my sweet Presbyterian daddy said, then you be the best Buddhist you can be. Absolutely good for him. Absolutely. And that gave me permission to explore. And so the world opened up. I grew up in a very religiously segregated community. We had Christian denominations but we didn't have, I don't think there were any Jewish people or anybody from any other faiths other than Christian denominations in the town in which I lived. And so that gave me an opportunity to explore world beliefs and world cultures and to learn about people who were in one town over, meeting people of other faiths.
Did you grow up in New England? Where were you? Where did you grow up?
Can you not hear that in my voice? I am as Southern as they come.
You've lost a lot of the accent. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, how did that affect you and your view of spirituality when you started exploring those other religions and cultures and thoughts that were different from perhaps how you were raised?
Isn't it wonderful that we're all different and we've got all these beliefs and ideas that we can pull from and can question and be curious about? And that's the gift. That takes me right back to that notion of connection. It all comes back to that word for me.
Did you find a lot of commonalities or did you find a lot of differences?
But yes to both. And isn't that wonderful? And I learned very early that the two most powerful words in the whole world are teach me. When you say teach me to someone, that opens doors of being able to learn from each other in different ways.
And then how did you assimilate, okay, this resonates with me, this doesn't really resonate with me? Did you just go by feeling? Did you do like a deep dive into the research of the different religions and philosophies, or how did you approach that? Or did you just let it come in just naturally?
All of the above. And here's what I mean by that. Yes, I mean, I can't tell you how much time I spent studying various world religions and books. And, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I think it's important. I think it's an important thing to say. I had not spent very much time learning about Islam until after 9/11. And on the morning that those planes hit the Twin Tower, I stopped at a bookstore and bought a copy of the Quran because I knew I needed to learn something about the underpinning of the folks that was so affecting.
And what did you learn when you read it?
Beautiful pieces to the Quran, and I learned that there are pieces that are very similar to the Christian Bible.
Mm-hmm. Did that surprise you?
No, because it comes out of that same place, in many ways. But so yes, I took deep dives, but I also felt it was important to discern what was my truth, not just to accept a blanket belief system because it was a blanket belief system.
And how did you decide what to accept and what to not accept?
What was kind? What brings people together? What connects us?
Yeah. Why do you think there's other stuff in those religious and other cultural texts? Why do you think that? I agree with you. That's the basis of all religions. That's where they all started. And then as they evolved over time, things changed. What do you think was the catalyst to cause those changes, or were there multiple catalysts?
Well, if we're talking about the patriarchal religions from the Fertile Crescent, is that what you mean?
Whatever you want to talk to about it.
Okay. Well, if that's what you mean, it has to do the patriarchy in any form from any place. Part of what it did was to subjugate the divine feminine. And, I don't know if you're familiar with this, an old book, but it's still one of my favorite books by an anthropologist whose name is Merlin Stone. And the name of the book is When God Was a Woman.
I haven't read it. It sounds fascinating.
Oh, you should. It's a classic in the world of feminist literature and goddess studies. And she traces back the Mesopotamian divine feminine worship long before there was patriarchy, before it came down. So I think the same things that influence folks today, greed and materialism and all those things influenced and changed how we see spirituality.
Control.
Yeah. Yes.
I find that so many of the religions in the adaptations of the original version, perhaps, of the teachings, in the translations and the editing and all of that, that's when fear was brought in, and it was to control the masses. That's my opinion. And it did a great job. I mean, certainly we've witnessed that in the past few years with the whole COVID thing. I mean, my goodness, to have a whole world just knee deep in fear, or waist deep even in fear, was really a remarkable thing to watch. For me, I would imagine it would be for you too, especially going through the Vietnam era where there were so many people that were in fear. My husband served during the Vietnam era. He's 10 years older than I am, and he grew up in an Air Force family, and he got drafted into the Army. He sat out a semester of college, and Uncle Sam came, looking for him, and his mother called his father and said, "You get that kid in the Air Force or don't come home tonight." That's what she said to his dad, because all these army guys were coming home in body bags. All these kids that were in the army during the Vietnam conflict. And you know what? He got him in the Air Force that day. So went to one of the generals and they pulled some strings and got him in the Air Force. But he served during the Vietnam conflict too. That's what he calls it, the Vietnam conflict. And I just can't even imagine going through that, with your child in that situation, going off to war, not just Vietnam, but any of them, World War I, World War II, Iraq, all of them. I just can't even imagine. So please explain, changing topics a little bit, please explain your connection to the sea and the sand and the beaches and all of that. You North Carolina girl, you.
Well, it is 174 steps from my front door to the ocean. It is one house away to the Sound, the marshes. I live on a barrier island, and I grew up on a different barrier island than the one I live on now. And some of my earliest memories are fishing with my father, oystering with my father. I have another creative nonfiction piece called Mending Nets, where I talk about the oyster knife that my father gave me the year I was 5. I still...
Wow.
Great oyster knife. So it's in my bones. It's in my blood. I can't remember a time where that connection to the sand and the sea were not a part of who I am. I grew up in a house that was at the time on the ocean. And Mama could stand at the kitchen window and watch me swim. There were no sand dunes back then. It was just flat. And there was a day, I think it was about 9, and I got out into the water. It was a gorgeous day. It was very quiet in our area. I was all by myself, and a wave came straight up in front of me. It just crested straight up. And as it did, a shark swam by in the waves.
Oh, Lord.
My thought was, I hope Mama didn't see that. It never crossed my mind to be afraid of the shark. What crossed my mind was that if Mama saw it, because she would be afraid of sharks, she wouldn't let me back out in that water. And I'd do anything to stay in that water. Even today, I will do anything to stay in that water.
So did she see it?
No, I got away with it.
And you didn't tell her about it?
Never. I never told her about that shark.
What is it, do you think, that you resonate? What causes you to resonate so much with the sea and the sand? Other than you were raised there, but what is it? There's more to it than that.
Oh, a lot more. You're absolutely right. All life begins in the marsh. All life on this planet begins in marshes. Without the marshes and the incubators that they are, and the estuaries that then send life out to the rest of the planet, we have no planet.
I don't know that I've ever heard that before. Can you say more about that?
No, that's the science stuff I can't do too well. But the general...
Take a stab at it.
I will. If you think in terms of just when I've told you there's no such thing as a hierarchy, but hear this out. If you think in terms of bigger fish eating smaller fish, eating smaller fish, eating smaller fish, eventually you get down to microscopic folks who live in that water. And I say folks because we're learning more and more that there's consciousness and cognition among folks. There's wonderful material, for example, out there on octopuses right now. And what we have learned that they know, it's amazing. So without those smaller folks who live in the marshes, and I'm talking, microscopic beings, then there's no bigger stuff, and there's no connection of how everything works together. And that doesn't just mean the fish and those folks, but the plants themselves and the mud itself. All of that is the basics of life. And without that, we're all in trouble. And so for me, some of the most wonderful days in my life have been spent sitting in the marshes, From where I can live now, I can look out my window, and we have a great blue heron who lives in our neighborhood. We've named him Charlie. I don't know why we named him, but his name is Charlie. And Charlie is here in the spring and the summer, and he fishes off my neighbor's docks and in the marsh. And then he goes away somewhere in the winter, and we don't see him. And so Charlie is, for me, a harbinger of spring coming, of the cycles of the season. And I call him Charlie, my neighbor. And I talk about him the same way I talk about Bob and Carol, who are my neighbors in the next house over. Charlie is just as much my neighbor as they are. So there's that notion of connectedness again.
Bob and Carol on one side of you, Ted and Alice on the other. So I'm dating myself on this too. It was a movie for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
No. Yes.
Yeah.
And we joke about that too.
Yeah, I bet. Well, the marshes have a very distinctive smell to them.
If I could wear perfume, I would.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what do they call it? Puff mud or puff luff mud or something? What's that mud called in the marsh?
We just call it mud. Where I'm from.
Yeah, there's a name for it. Because I've heard it. I've spent a lot of time in South Carolina, especially in the Low Country.
Right.
And I want to say it's PLUFF mud or something like that. And it has it's definitely has a distinctive smell to it.
It does. And for me, when I walk out my door at night to say goodnight to the world, and thank you to the world, and the tide is low, I just breathe it in. I love that smell of the marsh.
Yeah, yeah. I understand. You are a marsh girl. Listen to you.
Man.
I'm thinking, you are a marsh hippie girl. You're going out to say goodnight to the marsh before you go to bed.
I go outside and say thank you and goodnight to everybody out there. The tree. I live in the maritime forest, so I have oak trees and a lot of vegetation around my house that protect me from storms. So I'm very grateful for them. So I say thank you to all those folks who are out there.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's go back to sacred geometry. Let's talk about that for a minute, and then we'll get. I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about legends, and then I want to get into how you help people with grieving in a minute. So, sacred geometry, what is it? Can you explain a little bit about it and how it affects our world?
Absolutely. Let's start with something real basic. Imagine, if you will, two interlocking circles. I don't know if you can see this or not. Can you see the ring I'm holding up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, two interlocking circles, and it makes a peace sign almost in the middle.
Almost, but not quite. And I'll show you what that means. That symbol, those two interlocking circles, is called a vesica Pisces. It means the vessel of the fish. And when you hold it so that the center interlocking piece is horizontal, that space is called a mandorla. It means almond. And when you hold the ring or you hold the symbol that way, it becomes that quintessential sacred symbol of the fish, of the Christian fish.
Yeah, right.
Thus, vesica Pisces, right? The vessel of the fish. When you hold it the other way, so that the mandorla is vertical, you have the symbol of the goddess. You have that semicircle that we have seen all around every divine feminine. Take Our Lady of Guadalupe and the symbols all around her. You have the divine feminine symbol. So if you take, and this is the ring on my finger is from the Wellhead at Chaliswell Gardens in Glastonbury, England. But if you take the notion of the vesica Pisces, those two interlocking circles, that becomes the building block of all other formations of sacred geometry. And if you keep drawing that out in with a compass and a protractor and thing, you end up with the flower of life. Oh, yeah. It's the basics of that. You can see it when you back up and kind of look at it. But all nature has a connection to and unfurling through sacred geometry. So there's a mathematical component to everything in nature. Think about a chambered nautilus, that wonderful seashell with those interior chambers. All of those are in what's called the divine ratio. That 1 point, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I'm going to have this exactly right, 1.68 something in relationship to the next spoke in the wheel. We see it all over the place. Let me show you another example. This is a Murex shell. And it's really, really old. I found it on the beach the year I was 10 after Hurricane Donna. I write about it in a piece called The Talisman from Poseidon, and this is it. But if you can see the whorls in the top of the shell, they are on that same divine ratio I've just described.
Well, and for those of you that are listening, it's one of those seashells you can hold it up to your ear and hear the ocean in it.
You sure can.
Yeah, which is so fun to do that. I don't quite know how that works, but it's pretty amazing.
Isn't it?
That works. You had mentioned a pine cone earlier. What's the sacred geometry of a pine cone? Is it that swirl again?
Same thing. It's the way it unfurls. If you watch a pine cone blossom, it unfurls in that same ratio. It's fascinating how all of that works.
It is. And I know that Washington, D.C. and other cities that are great cities in the world were laid out per sacred geometry.
Absolutely.
The way that the roads and all of where the buildings were going to be, where the Capitol is, where the White House is, I mean, all that jazz was all laid out per sacred geometry. And even on the dollar bill and other forms of money throughout the world all have sacred geometry on them as well, don't they?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. And so do the great cathedrals. One of my very favorite books is Pillar of the Earth by Ken Follett, where he writes about the sacred geometry and the math that went into building the great cathedrals during the Middle Ages in Europe.
Is that a novel?
Historical fiction, yeah.
Historical fiction. Yeah, sounds good. I'm going to take a long flight here in the next few days, so I'm going to look it up.
Oh, good. It's a big old book. It's huge.
Well, that's good. I'm flying to Ireland, so it's going to be a long trip.
You'll find lots of sacred geometry in Ireland. In fact, you go over and start looking at some of the crosses and all that weaving and the way they do that. This, for example, from Ireland, see that symbol of can never pronounce it, but it's a trilogy. So we see that. Yeah.
I did. She held, for those of you that are listening, Deb held up her coffee cup and it has a symbol on it. Yeah. Well, I get to stay in a castle. So
that's fun.
So it's 800 years old. I'm sure there'll be lots of sacred geometry there.
I imagine there will. I imagine.
When I told my younger brother, John, that I was going, he goes, well, I hope you don't spend the week in the dungeon. I said, yeah, thanks.
Oh, fine.
Yeah. Good for you. Hilarious. All right. So let's jump to legends. Speaking of Ireland, that whole, I think, area, I think the Druids, the Celts, you got the Irish, Scotland, England, Wales, all those different areas. And certainly every civilization and every culture has legends. Do you think there's an element of truth in legends?
Absolutely, I do. Let me give you an example. Since you're going to Ireland, you might enjoy looking at this. So before there was Saint Bridget, there was the goddess Bridget.
Oh.
Long before there was Saint Bridget, there was the goddess Bridget. And the history and story of her life and how she became so deeply ingrained in the psyche of the British people that the Christians couldn't get rid of her. So here's what happened. So Bridget was kind of the be-all, end-all goddess of so much related to agriculture. She was the goddess of holy wells. She was the goddess of milk and honey and early lambing and poetry and fire. She was so many things to people who needed all of those things that I just rattled off to exist in an agrarian culture. In the notion of the wheel of the year, of how there are not just 4 seasons, but 8, those what we call cross-quarter seasons, there are 4 of them, between Yule in December and spring at Ostara, there's a holiday and a celebration called Imbolc. And the word means in the belly, as in the time when sheep are about to have babies. So that's Bridget's time of the year. That's when Bridget is a protector of the coming of the baby lambs, of that life that happens just under the surface of the dirt, where plants are just beginning to wake up and come alive. That's the time of year where crocuses, for example, come up through the snow, right? So Bridget was such a tremendous influence and connector of the people of the land in Ireland, that when Christianity came, they weren't going to give her up. It wasn't going to happen. So through a lot of series of events, some historians believe that they basically turned her into a Catholic saint and canonized her, and that the two are one and the same. I don't particularly know, or I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of the feast days and the holidays and stuff like that were all assimilated into Catholicism and Christianity as we know it today. And you're spelling Bridget, is it the BRIDGID spelling or Bridget? What's the difference?
I don't know. There's no right or wrong to it. There's a zillion ways to spell it. I tend to spell it BRIGID. I'm trying to see it.
Yeah, that's how I wrote it. Yeah.
But what came from the notion of what was called Imbolc today, it then became in Catholicism Candlemas, the lighting, because the sun is becoming. We're seeing it.
Days are shorter.
Yeah. So what is the truth? We'll never know. There's no way.
It's all the truth. It's all the truth. It's just carrying on of the traditions and back to the control thing, right? We need you to think this way, so we're going to incorporate whatever it is that you believe into our version of it to help you think that way. And it's fascinating to me to study that history of all that stuff. I mean, there are saints' names that I never heard of. Many, 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 many of them. I was married in St. Paschal Balin Church. I never heard of Paschal Balin. I mean, my spirit guide, Pope Clement VI, I never heard of him either. So it's lots of, of different people that I think were legends, and see if this resonates with you, Deb, that were legends that gave people hope, gave people comfort, gave people peace, strength, when they were going through tough times. Exactly. Strength.
Right.
Exactly. And they've just been assimilated in there. One of my favorite stories about Ireland is my girlfriend, whose party I'm going to, she sent me a picture of a fairy tree. And there's a story that there was an American archaeologist in Ireland, and he was walking down the street of some town, and he was asking just random people, do you believe in fairies? And everybody said, no, I don't believe in fairies. And then this one woman said, no, sir, I do not. And they're everywhere. And then my girlfriend, Rosaline, said, but you talk to any farmer, they're not going to cut down a fairy tree. They're going to plow around it. A fairy tree is like a bush with thorns on it. And she says, you'll see this amazing field, and it's vast, and those fairy trees are dotted because those farmers aren't going to cut down those fairy trees even today.
I just read an article about a road in Iceland that got moved. It was Iceland. They moved the road in order not to disturb the fairy folks.
Yeah. Isn't that wild?
Plan. I love that.
I know. Me too. And there obviously is some proof along the way in that creates those beliefs, and then the beliefs get passed down through the generations. And then, is it the belief that makes it real, or is it that there's really fairies living in a fairy tree that make it real?
Well, I'd like to think they're really fairies.
Yeah. Or is it a combination of both?
Yeah. Again, these are unanswerable questions, but aren't they fun to think about?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have 5 grandsons through marriage. And when one of them, ones that lives here, lost his first tooth, I took him and his brothers. They're all 3 years apart. They're all now, they're 17, 18, and 20 right now. But when they were little, there is a botanical garden near our home, and they had the fairy village that they built out of little twigs and leaves and jazz like that. So these guys were like 3, 4, and 5 when I took them there. And I made up this big story about this fairy village, and we had to go in the day, but we had to be extra quiet because the fairies were sleeping because they were out all night delivering, the money to the kids, the tooth fairy who had lost their teeth, and that the tooth fairy lived in the fairy village, but that was just that fairy's job. We had tooth fairies in the village, like we had people that grew the cows or made them, milk the cows or made the clothes or made the whatever. Everybody had jobs like they do in regular life. Oh my God, these kids, their eyes were about bugging out of their heads. They will still tell you about the fairy village if you ask them, even as teenagers, and they're big and cool now. But I think there's just such an element of magic there with all of these legends, no matter how old you are, that it can really enhance our lives. Why is that?
I think we all desperately search for magic. And I use that in a really big, nebulous, encompassing way. I think we all want magic. We want something that we can't explain, but that we feel like is a part of our reality and takes care of us and watches over us, protects us, strengthens us, and gives us whatever courage we need to go through every day. And however we call that magic, or whatever name we give it, or whatever belief system we come from, we all have this desire to connect to something unseen. And if it's fairy folks or God or whoever or whatever along the way, we're right back to my theme of connection.
Well, and I think that's a great springboard too about people's spirituality too. And I find, and I want to get into your book about helping people deal with grief and how to prepare for the end of life with a loved one. But I find too that people, when the subject comes up, some people will say, well, I don't really want to talk about it. And then when I say, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? And then they come back to it. They want to know. Everybody wants to know. All right, what happens? What really happens? Is there something more? What's going on?
I joke all the time that I would love to be able to take a notepad and a pen with me when I die. I got a lot of questions.
You won't need it because you'll just know it. I mean, I'm talking to kabillions of spirits over the years. They just say it's so amazing because you just get there and you just have you have access to universal intelligence.
And I know you do, but I have to joke about taking the pen with me.
Well, you're a writer. Of course you're going to take a pen and a piece of paper. All right, so let's jump over to the grief stuff. In your book, A Good Friend for Bad Times, I love that title. What a great title. You help people cope as death approaches. I call that anticipatory grief.
Right.
And after death too. So tell us about that. Give us the cliff notes.
We grieve so much in our lives, Julie. We really do. And when I wrote that book, my focus at that time, the book really, just to back up a minute, the book started out as a thank you note to all the people who did things so wonderfully for me and my sister when our parents died. They died 2 years apart, but Dad died first, and then Mama, and it started out as a thank you note, and I realized that there was a lot about grieving and death culture that was getting lost, and so that was an intent that ended up as a part of the book. We grieve in anticipation. For example, where I live today, it's the first day of public school. There are parents sobbing today because they are grieving the child that started school today and the transition of who that knew. They're excited, of course, perhaps for the newness that's coming for their child, but they also grieve of what was. This baby is gone, right? So we grieve even happy times sometimes, and we grieve losses in more than human losses. In the dedication to the book is dedicated to my parents and a couple of friends and my cat Merlin, the magic cat. And Merlin,
of course, you have a cat named Merlin.
Of course, I
love it.
For 18 and a half years.
Oh my goodness.
Merlin was a true magic cat. He rode in my truck with me. He sat on the pontoon of my Hobie cat. He walked on the beach with me. He was the coolest cat in the universe, period. When he got sick and I knew he was going to die, was I a mess? Of course I was. So, you grieve that. You grieve moving house. We grieve in anticipation, even though you're excited about where you're going, perhaps, but there's also this loss that goes with that. So I live at the mouth of Hurricane Alley. I've lost everything I've owned twice. So I know about that kind of grief and loss.
And yet you stay there.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah. My girlfriend owns a home in the Keys that was passed down through multiple generations in the Florida Keys. And she says her grandmother used to say, when you live near the ocean, sometimes you live in the ocean.
That's right. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. As we are recording this, one of my best friends of more than 50 years is at our hospice care center, transitioning out. And I was on the phone with her husband last night, who is my oldest friend. He and I have been friends since the third grade. And so a lot of history with these folks. And Carol has had cancer for a very long time. So the anticipatory process has been what it's been. We go through the same stages, and I'll come back and talk about that word in a minute, in anticipatory grief that we do after death. And those 5 stereotypical quintessential stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gave us, and let me see if I can do them in order here, although they're not really in order, and that's what's important. So we have denial and bargaining and anger and despair and acceptance. And that sort of became the model, the foundation model for a lot of other grief theories. And even Kubler-Ross herself said, those are not sequential. They're not in order. One emotion masks another, rolls on top of another. There's a children's toy that I talk about as a visual for what grief looks like. I don't know what it looks like today, but there used to be a piece of wood, and on it were colored wires and different colored beads on the wires, and children would play with it. That's what grief looks like. We get emotions running on top of each other, and sometimes we focus on one emotion for a long time and leave the others, and then another one comes in and masks it, all that sort of stuff. So we live in this, on one hand, this state of anticipation that the shoe is going to drop, whatever the shoe is, it's coming. We survive that. And when we think, okay, and this is what John and I talked about last night, my friend. He said, I've been expecting her to die for so long. This has been coming for such a long time. I thought I would be better prepared. And of course you're not. Because the grief starts all over again. The process starts all over again. And it will when she actually passes. There'll be another phase of it. And that's what we do. And And it's as sad and as difficult as grieving is, it is also such a gift. Because what grieving says is, I love you. I care about you. We've become entwined. We're a part of each other. We are somehow deeply connected.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I find too that when, at least with my clients, and it's probably because of the space that I swim in, but I just came from the Helping Parents Heal conference in Phoenix, literally landed last night and spoke there this past weekend. And the thing that I find is fascinating is that the parents, they had 1,100 attendees there. The one common denominator was when they can communicate with their child's spirit, when somebody can communicate with their loved one's spirit, it's the best way that they have found to help them heal their grief. Because they know, I heard somebody say, my child told me, I'm not dead, I'm just different. And so they know that that child or that loved one's spirit is still with them and around them, and they can communicate with them. Have you found that to be the case? University-based research corroborates that, validates that, says that's the number one way, according to the research, to help people heal. Certainly it's a multiple-pronged approach. There's lots of things that come into play, but have you found that to be the case as well in your work?
Absolutely, I have. And I'm not a medium. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you who are, but I am not a medium. And so one of my oldest friends died a couple of years ago. And I just knew that she was going to come back and see me and hang out. I knew she was. Why would we have walked this metaphysical path together for 50 years? Surely she was going to show up, right? She didn't. And I was angry, and I was hurt, and I was a lot of things. And I called another friend of mine who is a medium, and I said, see if you could talk to Jean. See, what is she doing? Why hasn't she? And I could give her some time to get over there and get adjusted, go through a likes review. I mean, I knew all those rules, right? And my friend who did indeed talk to her, and she called me and she laughed and she said, and Jael said, what are you doing over there? Deb's worried about you and this, that, and the other. Jean said, well, what the hell does she think I'm doing over here? and that was so the way she would have said it, that it was so comforting to me. And she gave me a lot of other messages along as well. Absolutely. It is very comforting to remember that this isn't it.
Well, I get that Jean's around you all the time. It's just you being able to, to pick up that she is. I had a gal call into my show last week who her son died a year ago, and she said, I keep asking him to come to me in my dreams, and he just hasn't come for a year, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. What do I need to do? And so we were having a conference call with her son's spirit in heaven, and the son said, Mama, I think she was Russian. Mama, I'm around you all the time. I come to see you in your dreams every night. And I said to her, are you a sound sleeper? And she said, oh no, I take really strong sleeping medication that knocks me out. I'm like, well, duh. Yeah, that's what's going on. So I can help you with Jean. I can help you with some tricks to, so that you can perceive Jean.
And I have been able to do that with lots of other people. I've had lots of other people who come and visit in dreams they have come and shown up in whatever way, and meditation, whatever. But I really just didn't understand why Jean had not just come right on over here and knocking on the door,
But when you got the messages from your friend who's a medium, did you find that comforting?
Oh, absolutely.
How did you feel after you received them?
Oh, it sent me down a rabbit hole that you wouldn't believe. It took me to Bhutan.
Wow.
It was the strangest sequencing of events. In fact, at some point, if you ever get an opportunity to listen, I'll send you the link to it, to an episode on my podcast where I talk about the series of events that that got me and Jean connected after she died is just amazing. Just wonderful.
Yeah, send it to me and we'll put it in the show notes. Because, we can't leave everybody watching and listening hanging with that kind of a tease, for God's sakes.
Yeah, it's a great story.
So back to the anticipatory grief and then grief after the fact. Are there like 3 helpful hints you can give us, you can share with all of us that will help people that are in the middle of that now and also after the fact, after their loved one passes?
Be patient with yourself. Grief is a process. It is a journey. I wish I could say it ends, but it doesn't. It changes, it morphs, it takes a different form. But be patient with yourself. We live in such an instant society today that we just want it to be over. When will the pain stop? The pain changes. So be patient with yourself. Remember that anger is a part of the process. And that is so hard for so many people. In my culture, it is not ladylike to be mad. It is not okay to be angry. You can be lots of things, but you can't be mad.
Don't be ugly.
That's
Girl,
exactly right. Ugly doesn't, my grandma would say, ugly doesn't look pretty on you. Well, anger is great. Anger is what motivates us. Anger is what moves us through grief, is to allow ourselves to feel that whole gamut of emotions, but particularly the anger, because that's the one that we tend to stuff down the most. So allow the anger to come. And then the third thing is to allow people to help take care of you. And that's so hard. I'm fine. I'm doing just fine, thank you. No, you're not. No, you're not. For example, in my conversation with my friend last night, we were talking about what he needed as his wife is at hospice dying. And I said, do you need me to come wash the dishes? Is that what you need? You need me to come do laundry? Can I go to the grocery store for you? Those kind of, and then sometimes to just do those things, just to show up and do them. Because if you ask, they'll say, oh no, I'm fine. I'm just fine. So to do those things. So be patient and kind with yourself. Allow yourself to feel all of the emotions and allow other people to be of service to you.
Mm-hmm. Those are wonderful. Is grieving the loss of a child, whether through an abortion or a miscarriage or a stillbirth or a child that lived, different from the grief of somebody dying very suddenly, like in a case of a suicide or a homicide, or somebody who's been sick, like your friend, or somebody who's very elderly? One of my dear friends, one of my best friends, her mom died on Saturday, and she's been wanting to go for a really long time. She was in her 90s and she was ready to go. So she and her 2 sisters and I are going to do a conference call with Mama Mills in heaven tonight. And, we're going to let them talk to her spirit and all of that. Is there a difference in that grieving? Is there a difference in a way that you would recommend that people go through the motions of grieving, or are they those 3 things that you mentioned a minute ago?
You can take all of the rules. You can take all of the theories about grief and all of thanatology is the bailiwick under which it falls. You can take all of that and throw it out the window when it comes to children.
Oh, why is that?
Because losing a child, whether you lose a child to a miscarriage or an abortion or a stillbirth or at a young age, or you lose a child as an adult, you've still lost a child. And the world is a different place because that's an extension of you in a way that nobody else ever can be. And so in my experience, all the rules are out the window, and that every situation is unique. And if you're working with somebody who is grieving the loss of a child, you have to be very tailored to what they may need and are feeling and going through. And there are all sorts of other emotions that don't play into that simplistic model, like guilt, for example. Although Granger Westberg, I believe it was, gave us the notion that one of the stages really is hope, and we don't express that very often or very much. Because when you're in the midst of all of that, hope is not something you want to think about. But losing a child is an entirely different thing. When we got to that chapter in the book, I consulted with a friend of mine who, that's her area of specialty. She's a Greek counselor with children, and she was really helpful in helping me put that chapter together in the book. It's a different thing. And I bet in your work, you see a lot of folks that's what they want to do, is talk to their children.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is we had a show that we did, I think it was last month, and I had a perinatal bereavement specialist, which is kind of a new area because that's a kind of like a niche that there's no support there for the women and the parents who lose a child in an abortion or a miscarriage or a stillborn baby. And I was fascinated by that. And she's kind of leading a movement to help with that, which I thought was just remarkable.
I think that's great. I'm so happy to hear that is being brought much more to consciousness.
Well, because we all know somebody, a lot of us have experienced, I haven't, but my mother and many of my friends and other family members have experienced, a perinatal kind of a situation. And it's a very specific kind of grief. And she did something, and I'd love to hear your take on this, Deb. She says that when, let's say, for instance, there's a stillborn baby, she'll ask them for permission to record maybe the other siblings and the other family members coming in and holding the baby that has died. And she says, I know that this is like the last thing that you think is going to be helpful to you, but I'll just keep it. And if you ever want it, then I'll send it to you. And she said, pretty much without fail, everybody wants it and they treasure that memory because it's a family movie with this baby who they weren't able to bring home. And I just thought, my goodness, what an amazing idea to do. Had you ever heard anything about that before?
I have not, but I'm fascinated by it. This is new information to me.
Yeah, I'll get you in touch, and we'll put a link in the show notes about it as well. Okay, well, thanks for that. Why do we incarnate?
To learn lessons.
Okay, what kind of lessons?
Okay, so here's the Deb short version of the answer to that question. So imagine, if you will, that we have, my image of it is floating out in space somewhere. There is this big ball of energy that is everything. That is God energy, that is divinity, whatever name you want to give it. And we are all a part of that. And at some point, we say, I want to know what it's like to live on Earth. I want to experience being human. What would that look like? How might I do that? So you have this negotiation with this God energy, this divinity that says, are you sure you want to do that? And you say, yeah, I do. And they go, okay, then we're going to need to have a conference and set out what the lessons are you're going to learn. So we do that. And we are told that it will take us many lifetimes to learn all of those lessons of what it means to be fully human. So we come back over and over again and experience those new lessons. But in between times, where do we go? What do we do? Well, I envision this big conference table in the sky where all of my guides and all of ancestors and all those folks who are my support team meet around the table and say, well, you did pretty good on this lesson, but boy, did you blow that one, girlfriend. You got to go back and do that one again. Or you got to learn another aspect of that or do this, that, the other. And I think that we do that in soul groups, that we don't come here alone. We come with a group of other beings who are here to support each other and to learn from each other. And sometimes the way we help each other learn lessons is wonderful and lovely and kind and loving. And sometimes it appears on a human level to be very adversarial, but we're still each other's teachers. So that's the short version answer to your question.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I always say we're always creating, right? We create every day, every moment of every day. What am I going to have to eat? What am I going to wear? How am I going to wear my hair? What am I going to do? All that kind of stuff. If you're taking care of children, I got to get Johnny and Susie and Sally and Ben all ready for school. What are they going to wear? What am I going to pack in their lunches? We're creating all day long. And then what happens? We die, we go back to heaven, and what are we doing? We're creating our next experience. So I don't think that it ever ends. And I think you bring up a really interesting point too, Deb, and that is when you say we're here to explore the human side of the equation, because our spirit knows what it's like to be a spirit. And so many of us, I think, have been taught or led to believe that as humans, we need to aspire to be a better spirit. Well, the spirit's already perfect, right? We're here to have the human experience because we create out of that grief. We create out of whatever it is we're experiencing and exploring. You have any thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree with you. And it's when I get in a snivet and I get so busy and I get so caught up in the mundane of the to-do list and, and this kind of stuff, I have to back up and say to myself, what is the lesson you're trying to teach yourself here yet again? Because not only do we learn lessons from one lifetime to another, I don't know about you, but I have to keep relearning lessons in this lifetime. I really do. And so to be able to say, slow down, breathe. What are you really trying to do here? Why am I in this situation? And sometimes you can't see the lesson while you're in the midst of it. You need time and space away from it. Sometimes far enough away to be in another dimension, perhaps. But I always have to say to myself, there's a lesson in every interaction, including ones with myself.
How's it benefiting me is what I say. How's this benefiting me? I was 9 hours late arriving into Phoenix on Friday. And I'm thinking, okay, how's this benefiting me? And then I get an email when I'm in the Sky Club, the Delta Sky Club in Atlanta, waiting to get my flight to Phoenix. And I got a note that my reservation had been canceled at the hotel. I'm going, okay, that was made last fall. I'm a speaker. I need to be at that hotel. And so I called the manager and they put me in another hotel. They'd had a water leak that had flooded some of the rooms. I thought, okay. Well, the hotel that they put me in was even nicer than the hotel that I was originally in. So, it's all unfolding perfectly as we go through all of these things.
And it's hard to remember that on the bigger picture, the world really is unfolding in perfect and divine order. And that is so hard to do.
Yeah. Well, and when I do past life scans with people, out of my buffet of psychicness, we can do anything you want, that involves spirit that I do. And what I found is that there's a semblance of these lessons. You said I'm here to learn different lessons and I'm learning them over and over. What I perceive with this, Deb, is that we're seeing basically the same script or a semblance of a script, many, many scripts that we come in to explore, but we're looking at it from a different perspective, different time, perhaps different gender, different set of circumstances, same basic script. And that fascinates me too, because it's kind of like, when you do kindergarten and you're in the 5th grade, well, you don't need to go repeat kindergarten because you know the stuff that you learned in kindergarten. But, let me look at the ABCs from a different perspective here as a 5th grader. And so that's kind of my take on that too. You are so lovely. You are just like, to me, the quintessential Earth Mom. And whenever I have the opportunity to talk to you, you're so nurturing and loving, and it's just like a big hug whenever I get to talk to you. So thank you for the work that you're doing to give a big hug to the people of the world and your writings and in your essays and all this stuff that you're doing. I think that your perspective on things is so comforting, I find, when I read your material.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
And that's a huge service to the world.
I look at it as all of us who do this work, the work you do, the work I do, the work so many of us do, is that the real bottom line is we have a finite amount of time. However you define time, that's a whole other conversation. But a finite amount of time in this lifetime, not only to learn these lessons, but also to do our part to be the teachers in other people's lives and other people's lessons. And isn't it nice if we can do it in a nice way? Not always, but we try. Yeah,
I agree. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, let's see. I made a list so I wouldn't forget.
Perfect.
Okay. So my website is debbowen.com, 2 B's, DEBBOWEN.com. I have a Substack that comes out probably I don't blow up people's mailboxes with this, probably every couple of weeks. And it's Deb Bowen at debbowen.substack. I have Facebook pages, Deb Bowen Author and Psychic Teachers. I have the book you're talking about, A Good Friend for Bad Times. And then I'm in the midst of writing a book. I'm co-authoring a book that it was a British publisher that's scheduled to come out next fall. So we're almost done with it. It's pretty exciting. We look at the wheel of the year, of those 8 holidays, in terms of how we connect with nature and with crafts. So that's going to be fun.
Good. And then your show.
And then there's the podcast, which has been on air since 2010. Samantha and I are old at this, 4.5 million downloads on that thing. Isn't that crazy?
Right. And I've been honored to be a guest on that show.
And we will have you back again. So we're looking forward to that. I'm also in the midst of writing a play, and I don't know where that's going. I'll keep you updated on how that's coming along. And then I teach, and that's a lot of what I do. I teach a lot of different kinds of courses. I currently have a tarot course that's a self-paced course for 38 weeks. You get a lesson, and it's not a how to read tarot cards course. It's a course that looks at the archetypes and the symbolism in tarot and how that applies to our lives. So it comes at it from that archetypical perspective. I do teach a couple of courses on how to read tarot, but not this one. And then I teach them a lot of other metaphysical topics. For example, I just finished a course in connecting with corvid energy and what crows have to tell us. Because a lot of people are seeing a lot of crows these days. So people called me and said, yeah, see, you're doing it too.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah.
Right. And so people started emailing me and saying, will you talk about crows for us? And I said, well, let's learn together. So we did. So crows and crystals and that whole science and spirituality and sacred geometry material that we've been talking about. So I teach a lot of those kinds of things, but that's what I'm doing right now.
I'm so sorry you're such an underachiever.
Well, I'm trying to do better.
All righty, everybody. My gosh, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but we'll have you back and we'll cover. So you can't leave everybody hanging. What the heck with the crows? I mean, I got to have you back and we got to figure out what's the deal with the crows.
I'll be happy to talk about crows.
All righty. In the meantime, everybody's sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama. Mwah! And from North Carolina, too, where Deb is. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.